Good morning, honorable agitators, respectful timekeeper, and everyone watching this video. My name is Fathi Arkana, and I am proudly representing SMKN 69 Jakarta. Okay, today, as the first speaker of the proposition, I am strongly supporting the motion. This House believes that in areas prone to disaster, the state should prioritize disaster mitigation over relocation. Okay, so before presenting our arguments, let us first define the key terms to set a clear boundary for today's debate. First, disaster-prone areas refers to regions that are geographically vulnerable to recurring natural hazards. These include coastal zones facing rising sea levels, agricultural lands on volcanic slopes, or cities located on tectonic fault lines. Second, disaster mitigation refers to both structural and non-structural measures taken to prevent or reduce the impact of disasters. This includes building resilient infrastructures like giant seawalls, earthquake-resistant buildings, as well as non-structural efforts like early warning system and disaster readiness education. And third, relocation means the permanent displacement and moving of entire communities to a completely new geographical area. Honorable agitators, we must be clear on what prioritize means. We do not mean that relocation is banned entirely in extreme unlivable scenarios. Rather, we argue that the state's primary budget, political will, and policy focus must be heavily directed toward making existing areas safe and resilient. Relocation should only be the absolute last resort, not the default solution. Okay, so as the proposition, we propose a clear mechanism. If this motion is implemented, the state will allocate funds from post-disaster reactive aid into pre-disaster mitigation infrastructure. The state will also partner with civil engineers and local leaders to build defense tailored to the specific geography of each region. Our stance is absolute. The state has a moral and practical obligation to protect people where they live, preserve their livelihood, and build a long-term structural resilience. Today, I will present four core arguments to prove our case. And first, the economic and livelihood viability. And second, the socio-cultural preservation and psychological well-being. Third, the logistical impossibility and host community conflict. Fourth, the state duty to innovate and why mitigation is economically superior to relocation. Okay, so let's move to my first argument. Why relocation destroys livelihoods while mitigation preserves them? Honorable agitators, human settlements are never arbitrary. People live in specific areas because of economic gravity and survival. Communities in coastal areas have generational skills as fishermen. People living near active volcanoes, farmers who depend heavily on the highly fertile volcanic soil. When the state forces mass relocation, you do not just move people from point A to point B. You completely sever their connection to their primary source of income, a fisherman who is located at 20 kilometers. The housing project can no longer fish. His skills become insanely useless. And what happened next? This creates systemic poverty, skyrocketing unemployment, and forces this community to rely entirely on government welfare. In contrast, prioritizing mitigation such as building offshore breakwaters, elevating houses, or smart zoning allows this vital economic hub to survive and thrive. We keep the fishermen fishing, we keep the farmer meat farming, and mitigation protects the multiplier effect on the local economy. Moving to my second argument regarding the socio-cultural fabric and human dignity. A community is not just a group of houses. It is built on decades, sometimes centuries of shared history, trust, and social networks. Relocation completely shatters this social capital. It displaces indigenous and local people from their ancestral lands. Furthermore, forced relocation causes massive psychological trauma. When you uproot families, they lose their sense of belonging and they feel like climate refugees within their own country. History shows that relocation camps often turn into permanent slums where depression and crime rates rise because people have lost their purpose. By prioritizing mitigation, the state respects humanity and mitigation, empowers local community by training in them disaster preparedness and to allow them to maintain their heritage, their identity, and their vital community. Support system. Now, let's examine my third argument, the sheer impracticality and the danger of host community conflicts. Vulnerability dictators, the opposition team might be romanticize relocation as a simple moving process, but we live in an era of overpopulation where safe unoccupied land is extremely scarce. If the state prioritizes relocation every time area is dim and disaster prone, where exactly do we put millions of people? Okay, so mass relocation triggers a massive social frictions and lands conflict within the existing residents in the receiving areas. Known as the host community, suddenly the host community has to compete with the relocated community or jobs, clean water, schools, and healthcare. And this puts immense pressure on the infrastructure of the new location, creating horizontal conflicts between citizens. The location does not solve the problem, it simply shifts the burden from one area to another mitigation area. On the other hand, is geographically sustainable instead of running away from the geography. Mitigation use science to adapt to the geography. And finally, my fourth argument, national and debunking. The myths of cost, the opposition team will likely argue that mitigation is too expensive and that building giant seawalls costs billions of dollars. Let me preemptively rebut this. Relocation is far more expensive in the long run. When you relocate, the state must buy a new land, build an entire new city from scratch, and suffer a total loss of the abandoned. Region's economic output is a massive sunk cost, and motivation is an investment. And the ultimate duty of a progressive state is to innovate, not to retreat. Look at Japan or the Netherlands. If they choose relocation over mitigation, Tokyo would be abandoned due to earthquakes, and to half of the Netherlands would be empty because it is below sea level. Instead, they invested in mitigation by prioritizing mitigation of the state drive innovation, civil engineering, and architecture and green infrastructure. This creates a highly advanced, climate resilient nation. And we stop being a victim of the nature and we start mastering our environment. And conclusion, in honorable educators, relocation is a short-sighted, destructive, and logistically impossible policy. It is cause economic ruins, cultural assure and social conflict. Mitigation is the only logical and moral path. It ensures economic continuity and protects the human dignity and foster true national resilience. For all these strong and absolute reasons, the proposition team is incredibly proud to propose this motion. My name is Fathi and thank you.